Hey everybody, I'm circling back on my notebook requests from you guys. I ended up getting Rhodia, I think that's how you pronounce it, and I also got a Moo notebook, but I'm going to talk about that one last. So I've already opened one of these notebooks so you can see. I think this is A5 on this size, 5.5 by 8.3 inches. I also prefer lined notebooks. They happen to offer blank, they offer lined with a margin, they offer grid, they offer graph, and they have spiral notebooks available as well. They have hard covers, and I believe they have soft covers as well. They also happen to have stapled notepads on the top or on the side, and they've been in business since 1934. And they started as a French company. I'm not really sure, quite honestly, if they're still in France. It says French design, handmade in Morocco. I purchased mine on Amazon, but they have a website that's very extensive. So the paper's nice and creamy, and there's a really cool flap back here for a pocket, so you can put things in it. Remember when we used to get business cards? Yeah, you can put your business cards back there when you're on site somewhere. And it has this great ribbon. It comes in several different colors. I happen to have gotten this lilac color and this sort of French blue. And yeah, so great color combinations. So I would highly recommend these. I've got some friends in the legal space who swear by these notepads. Several friends in the legal space. So this is the Moo notebook I ordered, and I ordered the Moo notebook because some people like to keep their notebooks. So this has this really cool sleeve. So if you need to keep your notebooks and you need to line them up, they'll line up and stand up on their own, which is kind of cool. And I'm familiar with Moo because in the past I used to do some consulting work, and my business cards were from Moo, and they were fantastic. So I figured that, it couldn't hurt to order them. So the cool thing that I liked about this particular notebook when I read the description is that it lays flat. So you can tell the way that it's bound. It'll lay flat when you're writing. The paper is white instead of that cream color like the Rhodia. And there's this section in the middle that has blank pages for those of you who like to doodle or like to be a little bit of an artist. If you don't get the blank pages, again, I like the lines pages. It's got a matching ribbon based on the color of the notebook that you happen to buy. There's no flap in the back of this one, but that doesn't bother me because, quite frankly, none of us are going to any meetings anytime soon during the pandemic, and we're not getting business cards, so that doesn't bother me. But those are it. So there are several color combinations. They come in hard and soft for the Moo. They come in lined paper, dotted paper, and unlined paper, and you can also customize those as well. So either one of these websites, if you go to their website, the manufacturer's website, you can customize notebooks to give away to members or at trade shows. So that's it. I really appreciate everyone's feedback on what they like to use, and I liked exploring all the different websites and the different types. I didn't realize there were that many types of notebooks out there, but that was a pretty fun project. So thanks, and have a great day.